good stuff there with Sam McEwen. He brought up an interesting point about Coach Rule in this situation, and that was his ability to go out and find coaches.
Yep.
Right? I kind of talked about it a little bit in the first segment about, kind of giving him the benefit of the doubt. But Sam got into it kind of from a different angle about his just network and his ability and his relationships. And, it probably hasn't been since Callahan that you've had a coach with this much of a Rolodex, because it kind of felt like Callahan could put together a pretty good staff. Now we can argue whether or not his decision on who to hire was good, but it felt like he knew a ton of people and could go get good, like guys with good reputations, right? Whether it's John Blake or whichever Norvell it was, Jay, I think. Like he was able to go out and get good guys. But we're probably talking 17, 18 years since Nebraska's had a coach where you're like, oh, yeah, he can go get dudes.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is don't undersell Coach White either, right? Because he's highly respected in the industry. He's pretty smart. He's a very good communicator. So, like, if you sit down and you talk to him, I would imagine he was as heavily involved in the interviewing process as Coach Rule, because it's hard. Rule can talk. Coach Rule, excuse me, can talk probably big picture, the philosophy of the program, what he's looking for as a person. Coach White would be the one that knows
like nitty gritty of the actual
ins and outs of what he needs as a DB coach.
So I've always kind of wondered that in these.
So you have to be able to trust, right? Can you imagine a head coach saying, "Hey, I know this is what you do. I want to empower you to be involved in the process." Because I would imagine kind of had to go down that way, right? Because who's teaching Coach Butler the terminology and what they do?
Yeah, I mean it's gonna be
Coach White.
It's gonna be White, yeah.
Right. So
I've always wondered that in these situations, and it probably varies by staff, but you probably know better than I do. Like, how much is it head coach? How much is it coordinator when you're talking about position coaches?
It's hard to say. I mean,
because what you're saying makes sense, right? Like, yeah, it's going to be nitty gritty.
And remember, Coach Rule just learned the defense last year.
Yeah.
So
because he'd never worked with Tony before, hadn't run this defense before.
It's brand spanking new.
Yeah.
And
so maybe he leans more on him in this situation than he would in others.
And I also think, just knowing a little bit about Coach Rule's personality, if he's hired you to do a job, he's going to empower you to execute it. Now he's going to hold you accountable. It ain't just some free for all.
Yeah.
But I think he would feel like Coach Wright, he ought to have some say so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And I just don't
because he probably
it just doesn't seem like we talked enough about that.
Coach White probably knows better in that situation what is necessary than Coach Rule does.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah. And I think Coach Rule can, and maybe they both know. It wouldn't strike me as if they both operate under the same parameters or guidelines of what kind of they're looking for. Okay, these are the character traits we want this person to have. This. It wouldn't surprise me, like, if they were both on the same page.
Yeah.
Right. Or, Coach Rule could say, all right, these are the parameters. What do you think? Or, you know what I mean?
Do you think it matters at all? Because this is more of a short-term view, but do you think it matters at all the types of guys that are already in the room as to who you bring in and coach them?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. Probably not.
Because on the one hand, you probably don't want to think that short term.
That's a really good question.
But on the other hand, you're 6 weeks away from the season, and you need that group to be good.
Yeah. I think you start with the adult in the room.
Okay.
And everybody else will get along. Because my guess is, when I hear that question out loud, I'm thinking Coach Rule and that support staff and the rest of the staff are thinking those young men are going to behave a certain way anyway. Like, this is what the culture dictates. This is how we treat adults. This is how we receive instruction. Now, those smaller culture groups can have their own personality, but I think the way that they do business is relatively the same. I think I don't think you can say, hey, he can coach this guy. Now, I do think you have to be cognizant of, if your horses can mesh.
Yeah. Well, right, because they're like, hey, you mentioned they've really only heard the one voice with Coach Cooper. And so, does it matter? It's like, hey, we probably need to get somebody a little similar to how he communicates so that the transition is less. Because like it'd be one thing to go from, going from a guy that's, really straightforward and like, kind of gets in your face and it's pretty loud and get after you a little bit, and then you go to like a super soft spoken guy that might, even if they're both great coaches, like that may cause some issues just in the transition that maybe you're not trying to deal with right now.
Yeah, and plus, I mean, I just think, Denny said this earlier, and he kind of, I thought it was a pretty good point. He says, I think Rule's approach to all people and hires is relatively the same, whether it be recruits or staff. Next man up is just deeper. You can't call the next man up if you don't think about or who the next on board is at all times. So, like, I think we say that, but you have to train in such a way where time doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that means outlasting people. Sometimes that means you got to be ready right now. I always say that to our guys. Like, you when I say train in a way that time doesn't matter, like that's
part of what you're talking about is timing.
Correct.
Right? Like it doesn't matter if Coach Coop leaves in March or if he leaves in July.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if he leaves in July or if he leaves in November. Like you got to be ready for it.
And I just think and if he's for Coach White, which I know that he is, I mean, that's part of the growing process. Right? Hey, you're going to have to do this someday.
You'll be head coach. This is part of it.
You know what I mean? Like I could
let's figure it out.
I just think and in return, when somebody feels like they have some skin in the game and they're personally they've got ownership of it. So I think that's when the beauty can happen. I definitely think we probably should talk more about Coach White's role in that process, because to the naked eye it seems seamless.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the dump happens Friday. Reports are circulating by Saturday.
Yeah, Saturday morning, pretty early too. So, that leads you to believe this had been in the works for some time. But, and that's, I just find, not that we need to know, but I find the mechanics of these things interesting too. Just, okay, I wonder when they knew about Cooper. I wonder when they started talking to people, but that's just my curiosity, right?
Well, DJ said something in the stream I think is pretty well
What's
said.
That?
He said, integrity and character and accountability matter. So does privacy. A balanced approach is totally doable. Like I kind of like that. I'm like, I think that's more than it's more than fair. I think it's right.
Yeah.
Right, because sometimes those aren't always fair and right aren't always the same thing. But I agree with that.
I mean, and this isn't my default. I will hear the argument though of like public employees. Like I'll hear the argument. I get it. I get why people make that argument. Now, again, is it they just want their pound of flesh? Does it matter? Whatever, like that type of stuff, and there probably is a finer line in there too, where it's, hey, this is a legal matter. We probably have to disclose this versus this is a personnel matter where we don't have to disclose it. There's probably some nuance in that as well.
Well, there's lots of things and reasons. I mean, pick a sport on campus that coaches have left and we don't know.
Yeah. Well, obviously we care more about this one because it's the highest profile. So like, there's a double standard there into when we care and when we don't care.
That's the word.
Which is totally
it's a total double standard.
Yeah, which I totally understand. But there's also, I mean, I'll hear the argument. I really will, because these are some of the highest paid employees of the state at any given time. And so I don't necessarily think we need to know, but
I just take the stance. It's not my business.
Yeah.
Even though it in a way, even though it does impact me directly.
I would say it impacts you more directly than it impacts most people. But also, I think the argument people make is when they're a public employee, it becomes everybody's business.
And I'm also, I trust his judgment. If he doesn't care, then I don't care.
Coming up next, we've got more Hurrdat Sports Radio.